In the quiet hours of a Tuesday morning, when most people were still asleep in their beds, a single security guard's split-second decision would expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of corporate power. What started as routine surveillance footage would become the key evidence in a case that would shake an entire industry to its core. Charles Morrison had built his empire on trust, precision. His company's reputation was everything, worth billions in contracts and public confidence. But in just 72 hours, one guard's conscience and Charles's own desperate attempt to control the narrative would unravel decades of carefully constructed lies. This is the story of how truth found its way out, despite every effort to bury it. It's about ordinary people making extraordinary choices, when everything is on the line. And it's about the moment when doing the right thing becomes more important than keeping your job, your safety, or even your life. The footage exists. Decisions were made. The consequences changed everything. It happened. Marcus Rodriguez had been working the night shift at Meridian Corporate Tower for 8 years. He knew every corner of the building, every sound that echoed through the empty halls, and every pattern of light that danced across the marble floors as cars passed by outside. At 42 years old, Marcus was the kind of security guard who took his job seriously. While others might scroll through their phones or doze off during the quiet hours, Marcus walked his rounds religiously, checked every door twice, and kept his eyes on the security monitors with the dedication of someone who understood that vigilance was more than just a job requirement. The building housed dozens of companies, but the most important tenant was Morrison Industries, which occupied the top 15 floors. Charles Morrison himself was rarely seen in person, but his presence was felt throughout the building. Everyone knew the rules when it came to the Morrison floors. Extra security protocols, special keycards required, and absolutely no unauthorized personnel allowed after 6 p.m. without express written permission. That Tuesday night started like any other. Marcus had clocked in at 11 p.m., received a brief handover from the evening shift supervisor, and begun his first round of the building. The security office was located on the 3rd floor, surrounded by monitors that displayed feeds from over 200 cameras positioned throughout the 40-story building. The Morrison floors had their own dedicated bank of screens, with cameras in every hallway, elevator bank, and common area. As Marcus settled into his chair with his first cup of coffee of the night, he noticed something unusual. Mindstep on one of the Morrison floor cameras was showing the wrong date. Instead of Tuesday, March 15th, it was displaying Monday, March 14th. It was a small detail, but Marcus had learned over the years that small details often mattered more than people realized. He made a note to report the technical glitch in the morning and continued monitoring the feeds. The building was quiet, as expected. A few late workers in some of the lower floors, cleaning crews making their rounds, and the usual collection of delivery personnel who worked through the night to stock the building's restaurants and coffee shops. Around 2 a.m., Marcus noticed movement on the 38th floor of the Morrison section. This was unusual because that floor had been supposedly vacant for renovations for the past 6 months. According to the building management, no one was authorized to be on that floor during the renovation period. Marcus leaned forward, adjusting the camera angle to get a better view. 3 men in dark suits were walking through what appeared to be a fully furnished and operational office space. The renovation story was clearly a lie. Marcus watched as the men moved systematically through the floor, carrying boxes and what looked like computer hard drives. They weren't construction workers or maintenance staff. In a bit, these were people who belonged in boardrooms, not empty office spaces at 2 in the morning. One of the men looked directly up at the camera for a moment, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. He recognized the face immediately. It was David Chen, Morrison Industries' chief financial officer. Marcus had seen Chen's photo in the business section of the newspaper dozens of times. What was the CFO doing on a supposedly vacant floor in the middle of the night, moving boxes like he was trying to hide something? Marcus quickly began recording the feed directly to a backup drive he kept for unusual incidents. His training had taught him to document everything that seemed out of place. Evolve. As he watched, the 3 men loaded several boxes onto a cart and wheeled them toward the service elevator that connected to the building's loading dock. The security guard faced a choice. He could simply note the incident in his log and report it through proper channels in the morning, which would mean informing building management, who would then contact Morrison Industries, or he could follow his instincts, which were screaming that something very wrong was happening. Marcus chose to trust his instincts. He left the security office and took the elevator down to the loading dock level. The building's layout meant that anyone using the service elevator would have to pass through a specific corridor that was covered by 3 different cameras. Marcus positioned himself where he could observe without being seen. 20 minutes later, the service elevator opened, and the same 3 men emerged, pushing 2 carts loaded with boxes and computer equipment. Marcus used his phone to take photos, being careful to capture clear images of the men's faces and the items they were moving. The photos weren't great quality because of the low lighting, but they were clear enough to serve as evidence. The men loaded everything into a white van that was waiting in the loading area. Marcus noted the license plate number and took photos of the vehicle as well. The entire operation was clearly planned and professional. These weren't random thieves or vandals. This was an organized effort by people who had legitimate access to the building and knew exactly what they were looking for. After the van left, Marcus returned to the security office and began reviewing the footage more carefully. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The timestamp issue he had noticed earlier wasn't a technical glitch. Someone had deliberately manipulated the camera system to show the wrong date. When he checked the building's master security log, it showed no record of anyone entering or leaving the 38th floor that night. Someone with high-level access to the building's security systems was covering their tracks in real time. Marcus spent the rest of his shift copying every piece of relevant footage to multiple backup drives. He documented everything he had witnessed, including the exact times, the identities of the people involved, and the license plate number of the van. By the time his shift ended at 7 a.m., he had compiled a comprehensive record of what appeared to be a sophisticated operation to remove evidence from Morrison Industries. The question that kept running through Marcus's mind was simple but terrifying. What were they trying to hide, and how far would they go to keep it hidden? As Marcus prepared to leave the building, he realized that his life had just become very complicated. He could pretend he had seen nothing and hope the problem would resolve itself. He could report the incident through proper channels and trust that the system would handle it appropriately. Or he could accept that he had stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple security breach and take action accordingly. The decision he made in the next few hours would determine not just his own fate, but the fate of thousands of people whose lives had been affected by whatever Morrison Industries was desperately trying to conceal. Marcus Rodriguez, a man who had spent 8 years faithfully protecting other people's property and secrets, was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is simply witness the truth. Just weighs one job in the journey of the bridge. When he walked out of Meridian Corporate Tower that morning, Marcus carried with him more than just backup drives full of evidence. He carried the weight of a choice that would change everything. The guard had taken action, but he didn't yet know that Charles Morrison was already aware of what had happened and was preparing his own response. The game had begun, and Marcus Rodriguez had just made the opening move without even realizing he was playing. Bill. Marcus Rodriguez couldn't sleep. After 8 years of working nights, his body had adapted to sleeping during the day, but not today. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw David Chen's face looking directly into that camera, and the systematic way those men had moved through what was supposed to be an empty floor. The backup drive sat on his kitchen table like small bombs, containing evidence of something that felt much larger and more dangerous than a simple corporate irregularity. By noon, Marcus had made his decision. He couldn't pretend he hadn't seen what he had seen, and he couldn't trust that reporting it through normal channels would lead to the right outcome. Morrison Industries had too much influence, too much money, and apparently too much to hide. He needed to find someone outside the system, someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Marcus thought of his younger sister, Elena, who worked as an investigative journalist for the city's main newspaper. Elena had always been the smart one in the family, the one who asked uncomfortable questions and refused to accept simple answers. She had won several awards for her work exposing corruption in local government and had built a reputation for protecting her sources no matter what pressure was applied. Elena lived in a small apartment across town, and Marcus decided to visit her in person rather than risk a phone call. As he drove through the city with the backup drives and a locked briefcase beside him, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Twice he noticed the same dark sedan in his rearview mirror. but when he took a detour through a residential neighborhood, Elena was surprised to see her brother at her door in the middle of the day. She worked mostly at night, chasing leads and conducting interviews, so she was usually asleep by this time. But the look on Marcus's face told her immediately that something serious was happening. "I need your help," Marcus said simply. "And I need you to promise me that whatever I show you, you'll be careful. This isn't like your usual stories about city council corruption or police misconduct. Dumb. This feels bigger, and I think it could be dangerous."
Elena had known her brother her entire life, and she had never seen him scared.
Marcus was the calm one, the reliable one, the person their entire family turned to when there was a crisis. If Marcus Rodriguez was frightened, then she should be too. They sat at Elena's kitchen table as Marcus explained everything he had witnessed. He showed her the photos from his phone, the backup drives full of security footage, and his detailed notes from that night. Elena's journalistic instincts took over immediately. She began asking questions, probing for details, and building a timeline of events. "The timestamp manipulation is key," Elena said, studying the footage on her laptop. "That's not something a low-level employee could do. That requires administrative access to the building's entire security system. Someone with serious technical knowledge and high-level authorization planned this operation." As they worked through the evidence together, Elena began researching Morrison Industries online. It was a company with an almost impossibly clean public image. Charles Morrison was frequently featured in business magazines as a model CEO, someone who had built a multi-billion-dollar corporation while maintaining the highest ethical standards. Morrison Industries was involved in government contracts, international development projects, and had been recognized multiple times for corporate social responsibility. But Elena had learned over the years that companies with the cleanest public images often had the most to hide. "I need to make some calls," Elena told her brother. "I have sources in law enforcement, federal agencies, and other journalists who specialize in corporate investigations. If Morrison Industries is involved in something serious enough to require midnight evidence removal, then other people might already be watching them." While Elena worked her contacts, Marcus felt the weight of what he had set in motion. By bringing the evidence to his sister, he had crossed a line from which there was no return. He was no longer just a security guard who had witnessed something unusual. He was now a whistleblower who had potentially exposed a major corporation's illegal activities. Elena's first call was to Detective Sarah Williams, someone she had worked with on previous investigations involving white-collar crime. Williams was one of the few police officers Elena trusted completely, someone who couldn't be pressured or bought by powerful interests. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," Elena said. "Have you heard any chatter about Morrison Industries? Any investigations? Any federal interest? Anything at all?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Elena, you need to be very careful about what you're asking, and you need to be even more careful about why you're asking it. Morrison Industries isn't just another corporation. They have contracts with the Department of Defense, the State Department, and several intelligence agencies. If you're investigating them, you're potentially stepping into national security territory." The warning in Detective Williams's voice was clear, but Elena had expected this. Moses. Major corporations often hid behind national security claims when they wanted to avoid scrutiny. The question was whether Morrison Industries was legitimately involved in classified work, or whether they were using government contracts as a shield for other activities. Elena's second call was to James Mitchell, an investigative journalist at a national newspaper who specialized in defense contractor fraud. Mitchell had been investigating various companies for over 20 years and had developed sources throughout the federal government. "Morrison Industries," Mitchell repeated when Elena mentioned the name. "Now that's interesting timing. I can't give you details, but let's just say that certain federal agencies have become very interested in Morrison's accounting practices recently. If you have evidence of document destruction or evidence tampering, that could be extremely valuable to ongoing investigations." This confirmation gave Elena the encouragement she needed to move forward. Whatever Marcus had witnessed wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern that had already attracted federal attention. Elena's third call was the most important. She contacted Robert Chen, an FBI agent she had worked with on several high-profile corruption cases. Chen wasn't related to David Chen from Morrison Industries, but he was someone Elena trusted to handle sensitive evidence appropriately. "I have a source who witnessed what appears to be systematic evidence destruction at Morrison Industries," Elena told Agent Chen. "Direct. The source is credible, and we have video evidence of the incident. If you're interested, I can arrange a meeting." Agent Chen's response was immediate. "Don't discuss this over the phone anymore. Don't email about it, don't text about it. If you really have what you think you have, then you need to understand that you and your source are now in potential danger. Morrison Industries has connections throughout the government, and they have resources you can't imagine. Meet me tomorrow at the coffee shop on 5th and Main at 10 a.m. Come alone and bring everything you have." And after Elena hung up, she and Marcus sat in silence for several minutes. The gravity of what they were dealing with was becoming clear. And set up an area of carpet or accounting irregularities. This was about a company that had enough power and influence to potentially threaten people who got in their way. "Marcus," Elena said finally, "I want you to go stay with our cousin Miguel for a few days. Don't go home, don't go to work, and don't tell anyone where you're going. If Morrison Industries realizes that their operation was witnessed, they're going to want to know who saw it and what that person knows." Marcus understood his sister's concern, but he also understood his own obligations. "I have to work tonight. If I suddenly disappear or call in sick, that's going to raise questions. Well, the last thing we want is to tip them off that someone knows about what happened." If Morrison Industries was monitoring their own security systems, they would eventually discover that someone had copied the footage from that night. When they did, they would trace that access back to Marcus Rodriguez. As evening approached, Marcus prepared to return to Meridian Corporate Tower for another night shift. He carried with him the knowledge that his life had fundamentally changed in the space of a single day. He was no longer just a security guard doing his job. He was now a key witness in what appeared to be a federal investigation, and he was walking back into the territory of people who had already proven they were willing to go to extraordinary lengths to protect their secrets. Elena watched her brother drive away, knowing that the next 24 hours would determine whether they had made the right choice in exposing what Marcus had witnessed. The FBI meeting was scheduled for the following morning, but there was no guarantee that Marcus would survive the night to attend it. At Morrison Industries, Charles Morrison was receiving his own briefing about the night's activities. His security team had completed their evidence removal operation successfully, but there was one troubling detail. The building's security logs showed unusual access to the camera systems during the time period when the operation took place. Someone had been watching, and someone had been recording. The hunt for the witness was about to begin. Charles Morrison stood in his corner office on the 40th floor of Meridian Corporate Tower, looking down at the city below. At 58 years old, he had spent more than 3 decades building Morrison Industries from a small government consulting firm into a multi-billion-dollar corporation with tentacles reaching into defense contracts, international development projects. He had not achieved this level of success by leaving loose ends untied or witnesses unmanaged. The report on his desk was brief, but deeply troubling. His head of security, Michael Torres, had discovered that someone with legitimate access to the building's security systems had been monitoring and recording the previous night's evidence removal operation. The technical analysis showed that footage had been copied to external drives during the exact time window when David Chen and his team had been clearing out the 38th floor. How many people have the level of access required to copy that footage? Morrison asked Torres, who stood at attention near the office door, including building management, our own security personnel, and the contracted security company, approximately 15 people. However, based on the timestamps and access logs, the person was physically present in the building's security office during the night shift. That narrows it down to 3 possibilities: the night security supervisor, the roving patrol guard. Morrison walked to the window and considered his options. In 30 years of business, he had faced numerous challenges that threatened his company's interests. Regulatory investigations, congressional hearings, whistleblower complaints, and media scrutiny had all been successfully managed through a combination of legal maneuvering, political connections, and when necessary, more direct forms of persuasion. The evidence that had been removed from the 38th floor contained documentation of Morrison Industries' involvement in a complex scheme to defraud the federal government of over $200 million in defense contracts. The scheme involved billing for services that were never provided, reporting fictional overseas operations, and using shell companies to hide the flow of money to offshore accounts controlled by Morrison himself. If that evidence became public, it would not only destroy Morrison Industries, but would also implicate dozens of government officials who had been paid to look the other way. The exposure would trigger investigations by multiple federal agencies, and would likely result in criminal charges that could send Morrison to prison for the rest of his life. I want you to identify which guard was in the security office last night, Morrison told Torres. The students who were liked all want a complete background check on that person within 6 hours. I want to know about their family, their finances, their weaknesses, and their connections. And I want constant surveillance on them starting immediately. Torres nodded and left the office to carry out his instructions. Morrison knew that once the witness was identified, he would have to make a choice about how to handle the situation. He preferred to resolve problems through negotiation and financial incentives when possible, but he was prepared to use other methods if necessary. At the same time, Morrison activated another aspect of his crisis management strategy. He placed a call to Senator Patricia Hayes, who chaired the Senate Defense Appropriations Subcommittee and had been a reliable ally for many years. Senator Hayes had received substantial campaign contributions from Morrison Industries, and her husband's consulting firm had been awarded several lucrative contracts from Morrison's Government Relations Division. "Patricia, I need a favor," Morrison said when the senator answered her private line. "Imperative that certain federal agencies may be planning to investigate Morrison Industries based on false allegations from a disgruntled employee. I need you to make some calls and find out what agencies are involved and how serious the threat is." Senator Hayes understood immediately what Morrison was asking. Over the years, their relationship had evolved from simple campaign contributions to a complex web of mutual favors and shared interests. Hayes had helped Morrison navigate regulatory challenges in the past, and Morrison had helped Hayes secure federal funding for projects in her home state. "I'll make some discreet inquiries," Hayes promised. "But Charles, if this is serious, you need to be prepared for the possibility that I won't be able to help you. Congressional oversight of defense contractors has become much more aggressive recently, and there are limits to what I can do without exposing myself to scandal." Morrison appreciated the senator's honesty, but he also knew that she underestimated the extent of their mutual exposure. If Morrison Industries fell, the investigation would uncover the payments to Hayes' husband's firm, the favors that had been exchanged. Hayes had more to lose than she realized. While Morrison worked his political connections, Torres and his team were conducting their investigation into the night shift security personnel. The building's access logs showed that only one person had been in the security office during the relevant time period: Marcus Rodriguez, a security guard who had worked the night shift for 8 years. Torres's background check on Rodriguez revealed a man with a clean record, no criminal history, and a stable work history. Rodriguez lived in a modest apartment, had limited savings, and supported his elderly mother who lived in a nursing home. He had one sister, Elena Rodriguez, who worked as an investigative journalist for the city's main newspaper. The connection to Elena Rodriguez immediately raised red flags for Torres. Investigative journalists were exactly the kind of people who would know how to handle sensitive evidence and who would have contacts in law enforcement and federal agencies. If Marcus Rodriguez had shared the security footage with his sister, then Morrison Industries was facing a much larger threat than a single witness. Torres presented his findings to Morrison, who realized immediately that the situation had become more complicated. A security guard could potentially be bought off or intimidated into silence, but an investigative journalist with evidence of corporate fraud would be much more difficult to manage. "I want full surveillance on both of them," Morrison ordered. "Phone taps, email monitoring, physical surveillance, the works. I want to know who they talk to, where they go, and what they're planning. And I want this done immediately, before they have a chance to share that evidence with anyone else." As Torres left to implement the surveillance operation, Morrison began preparing for the possibility that more aggressive action might be necessary. He placed a call to Vincent Caruso, a former intelligence operative who now ran a private security firm that handled sensitive problems for corporations and wealthy individuals. Caruso's services weren't listed in any directory and weren't discussed in polite company, but they were known to be extremely effective when conventional methods failed. Morrison had used Caruso's services twice before, both times to resolve problems that could not be handled through legal or financial means. "Vincent, I have a situation that requires your special expertise," Morrison said when Caruso answered his encrypted phone. "Two witnesses have evidence that could destroy my company and send me to prison. I need them neutralized quickly and quietly." Caruso listened as Morrison explained the details of the situation. He was a professional who understood the stakes involved in high-level corporate warfare. He also understood that Morrison Industries represented a client with virtually unlimited resources and government connections that could protect his operations from law enforcement scrutiny. "The journalist complicates things," Caruso said after hearing the details. "Journalists have editors, sources, and backup systems for protecting their work. If she disappears or has an accident, it will attract attention and potentially trigger the very investigation you're trying to prevent." Morrison knew that Caruso was right, but he also knew that he was running out of options. Every hour that passed increased the risk that the evidence would be shared with federal investigators or published in the newspaper. "Do whatever you think is best," Morrison told Caruso, "but understand that failure is not an option." Therapy. "If this evidence becomes public, everyone involved in protecting Morrison Industries will be exposed, including people with the power to make life very difficult for anyone who disappoints them." Morrison was reminding Caruso that Morrison Industries had clients and protectors throughout the government who would not appreciate being embarrassed by an incomplete operation. As the day progressed, Marcus Rodriguez was unaware that his life was being dissected by Morrison's security team, and that professional killers were being deployed to ensure his silence. He was focused on getting through another night shift, while carrying the weight of evidence that could bring down one of the most powerful corporations in the country. Elena Rodriguez was preparing for her meeting with FBI agent Robert Chen, unaware that her phone was being monitored and that her movements were being tracked by a surveillance team that had been watching her since noon. Both siblings were walking into a trap that had been years in the making, designed by a man who had built an empire on the principle that witnesses to inconvenient truths should be eliminated rather than managed. Charles Morrison was about to approve a response that would test whether truth and justice could survive against unlimited wealth and political power. The next 24 hours would determine whether Marcus and Elena Rodriguez would live to see their evidence reach the right people, or whether they would become casualties in a war they never knew they were fighting. FBI agent Robert Chen arrived at the coffee shop on 5th and Main 30 minutes early, as was his habit when meeting potential witnesses in sensitive cases. He chose a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances and positioned himself so he could monitor the street outside. 23 years with the Bureau had taught him that meetings like this one were often when cases either broke wide open or witnesses disappeared forever. Elena Rodriguez entered the coffee shop precisely at 10 a.m., carrying a laptop bag that Chen hoped contained the evidence she had described over the phone. She looked nervous but determined, scanning the room until she spotted Chen's subtle hand signal. As she approached his table, Chen noticed a white van parked across the street that hadn't been there when he arrived. "Miss Rodriguez," Chen said quietly as she sat down, "before you show me anything, I need you to understand something. If you really have evidence of the kind of activities you described, then both you and your brother are now in significant danger. Morrison Industries has resources and connections that most people can't comprehend, and they've proven in the past that they're willing to use them." Elena had expected this warning, but hearing it from an FBI agent made the threat feel more real and immediate. "Agent Chen, my brother risked everything to bring this evidence forward because he believes it's the right thing to do. We both understand the risks, but we also understand that some things are more important than personal safety." Chen admired her courage, but he also knew that courage alone wouldn't protect her from the kind of people who worked for Morrison Industries. As Elena opened her laptop and began showing him the security footage Marcus had copied, Chen used his peripheral vision to monitor the coffee shop's surroundings. The white van was still there, and he had noticed the same man walk past the window 3 times in the last 5 minutes. Darius. The evidence Elena presented was remarkable. The security footage clearly showed David Chen, Morrison's CFO, and 2 other men removing boxes and computer equipment from what was supposedly a vacant floor. The timestamp manipulation was obvious once you knew what to look for, and Marcus's documentation of the license plate numbers and times provided a clear chain of evidence. This is exactly what we've been looking for, Agent Chen told Elena. For the past 6 months, we've been building a case against Morrison Industries based on financial irregularities and whistleblower reports from inside the company. But we've never had physical evidence of document destruction or evidence tampering. This footage could be the key to the entire investigation. As they discussed the details of the evidence, Agent Chen's phone buzzed with a text message from his partner, Agent Sarah Walsh, who was monitoring their meeting from a surveillance vehicle parked 2 blocks away. The message was brief but alarming. Multiple vehicles with surveillance equipment have taken positions around the coffee shop. Recommend immediate extraction. Chen realized that Morrison's people had found Elena much faster than he had anticipated. The meeting had been compromised, and both he and Elena were now in immediate danger. Miss Rodriguez, we need to leave right now, Chen said quietly but urgently. Don't look around, don't act alarmed, but there are people watching this meeting who mean to do us harm. Follow my lead exactly, and don't deviate from my instructions for any reason. Elena felt her heart rate spike as she realized that the theoretical danger they had discussed had become an immediate physical threat. She followed Agent Chen as he stood up casually and walked toward the coffee shop's back entrance, carrying her laptop bag and trying to appear as though they were simply finishing a routine business meeting. As they exited through the rear of the building, Chen heard the distinctive sound of vehicle doors slamming shut from the street in front of the coffee shop. Morrison's surveillance team was moving into action, but they were focused on the front entrance where they expected their targets to emerge. Agent Walsh was waiting in an unmarked bureau vehicle in the alley behind the coffee shop. As Chen and Elena climbed into the car, Walsh was already pulling away and radioing for backup support. We have a federal witness under immediate threat from corporate security operatives, Walsh reported to the FBI field office, requesting protective detail and safe house authorization for Elena Rodriguez and her brother Marcus Rodriguez. During the 20-minute drive to the FBI field office, Elena called her brother to warn him about the surveillance threat. Marcus was at home, preparing to sleep before his evening shift, when his sister's call potentially saved his life. Marcus, don't go to work tonight, Elena said urgently. The FBI says Morrison's people are watching both of us, and it's not safe for you to follow your normal routine. Pack a bag and get out of your apartment right now. I'll call you later with instructions about where to meet. Marcus had been expecting something like this ever since he decided to bring the evidence forward, but the reality of being hunted by professional killers was more terrifying than he had anticipated. He quickly packed essential items and left his apartment through a basement exit that connected to the building's parking garage. As Marcus drove away from his home, he noticed the same dark sedan that had followed him the day before was parked across the street from his building. The men inside were watching his front entrance, waiting for him to emerge so they could follow him or worse. At the FBI field office, Agent Chen was briefing his supervisor, Assistant Director Michael Harrison, about the evidence Elena had provided. Harrison immediately recognized the significance of the case and authorized the full resources of the White-Collar Crime Division. This case just became a Priority 1 investigation, Harrison told his team. Morrison Industries has government contracts worth over $3 billion, and if they're defrauding the taxpayers while bribing officials to cover it up, then this affects national security as well as criminal law. Harrison also authorized protective custody for both Marcus and Elena Rodriguez, recognizing that their safety was essential to the success of the investigation. Federal marshals were dispatched to locate Marcus and bring him to a safe house where he could provide additional testimony without fear of retaliation. While the FBI was mobilizing to protect their witnesses, Charles Morrison was receiving updates on the failed surveillance operation. His security team had tracked Elena Rodriguez to the coffee shop, but they had lost her when FBI agents intervened. The presence of federal agents confirmed Morrison's worst fears. The evidence had already been shared with law enforcement. Morrison knew that he was now facing a federal investigation with witnesses under FBI protection and physical evidence that directly implicated him in criminal activities. His options were becoming more limited by the hour, and he was running out of time to prevent his empire from collapsing. Torres, I want you to implement the full lockdown protocol immediately, Morrison ordered his security chief. Every piece of potentially sensitive material needs to be destroyed or removed from all Morrison Industries facilities. Every computer hard drive needs to be replaced, and every employee who had access to classified information needs to be briefed about maintaining confidentiality. The full lockdown protocol was Morrison's ultimate contingency plan, designed to eliminate all evidence of criminal activity within 72 hours. It involved coordinated evidence destruction across multiple facilities, the activation of shell companies to hide financial transactions, and the implementation of legal strategies to delay and obstruct any federal investigation. Morrison also activated his most powerful political connections. He placed calls to Senator Hayes, Congressman Robert Mills, who chaired the House Intelligence Committee, and Deputy Attorney General Patricia Stone, who had the authority to influence the scope and direction of FBI investigations. Each of these officials owed their positions partly to Morrison's financial support and political influence. Each had received benefits from their relationship with Morrison Industries that they would not want to become public. Imagine. And each understood that their own survival might depend on helping Morrison weather this crisis. "Patricia, I need you to understand something," Morrison told Deputy Attorney General Stone during their encrypted phone conversation. "If this FBI investigation is allowed to proceed without proper oversight, it's going to expose relationships and activities that will embarrass this administration and damage national security. I think it would be wise for someone at your level to review the case personally and ensure that it's being handled appropriately." Deputy Attorney General Stone understood exactly what Morrison was asking. He wanted her to use her authority to limit the investigation, restrict access to evidence, and prevent the case from reaching conclusions that would implicate government officials. Stone had benefited significantly from her relationship with Morrison over the years. Her husband's law firm had received millions of dollars in consulting contracts from Morrison Industries, and her own political career had been funded partly by Morrison's network of political action committees. "Charles, you need to understand that there are limits to what I can do," Stone replied. "If this evidence is as damaging as you suggest, then other people in the Justice Department are going to want answers. I can't simply make a federal investigation disappear without justification." Morrison knew that Stone was right, but he also knew that she had more power than she was admitting. The Deputy Attorney General could influence the assignment of prosecutors, limit the scope of investigations, and control access to classified information that might be relevant to the case. "I'm not asking you to make anything disappear," Morrison said carefully, "but I'm asking you to ensure that this investigation is conducted with appropriate consideration for national security implications and existing relationships with government agencies." Vincent Caruso was implementing a more direct approach to the witness problem. Since the FBI had taken Elena Rodriguez into protective custody, Caruso's team would need to find another way to prevent the evidence from being used against Morrison Industries. Caruso had identified 3 potential pressure points that could be used to influence the Rodriguez siblings: Marcus's elderly mother in the nursing home, Elena's editor at the newspaper, and the other security guards who worked with Marcus and could potentially corroborate his testimony. The plan Caruso developed was sophisticated and multi-layered. Rather than directly targeting the witnesses themselves, he would create enough pressure and fear around them to encourage them to reconsider their cooperation with federal investigators. As the day progressed, the battle lines were being drawn for a confrontation that would determine whether justice could prevail against unlimited wealth and political power. The next 24 hours would determine the outcome of a war between truth and corruption that had been building for decades. The safe house where Marcus and Elena Rodriguez were being protected was a nondescript suburban home that the FBI used for high-value witnesses in federal cases. By agents who worked in shifts around the clock, it should have been one of the most secure places in the country, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that nowhere would be safe until Charles Morrison was behind bars. It had been 48 hours since Elena's meeting with Agent Chen, and the FBI investigation was moving faster than anyone had expected. Teams of federal agents were executing search warrants at Morrison Industries facilities across 3 states, seizing computers, financial records, and documents that had survived Morrison's evidence destruction efforts. Agent Chen briefed the Rodriguez siblings on the progress of the investigation each morning, and the news was encouraging. The security footage that Marcus had captured was providing investigators with leads to additional evidence. The license plate number from the white van had led to a shell company owned by Morrison Industries, and phone records from that company revealed communications with several government officials who were now under investigation themselves. Your brother's decision to document what he witnessed is going to bring down the largest defense contractor fraud scheme in recent history," Agent Chen told Elena during their morning briefing. "We estimate that Morrison Industries defrauded the government of over $400 million, and the cover-up involves at least 12 federal officials who took bribes to ignore the fraud." Despite the encouraging progress, both Marcus and Elena understood that they remained in danger until Morrison and his associates were arrested. The FBI had intercepted communications indicating that Morrison's security team was still actively searching for ways to eliminate the threat posed by their testimony. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. David Chen, Morrison's CFO, who had been captured on the security footage removing evidence, had been arrested at his home during a pre-dawn raid. Faced with overwhelming evidence of his involvement in the fraud scheme, Chen decided to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. Chen's testimony provided investigators with a detailed map of Morrison Industries' criminal activities. He revealed the location of offshore accounts containing stolen government funds, identified the government officials who had been bribed, and provided evidence of other witnesses who had been threatened or eliminated to protect the company's secrets. Most importantly, Chen revealed that Morrison had ordered the elimination of Marcus and Elena Rodriguez and had authorized Vincent Caruso to use any methods necessary to silence them. This information allowed the FBI to obtain warrants for Morrison's arrest on charges of witness intimidation and conspiracy to commit murder. The arrests began at dawn on Friday morning. Charles Morrison was taken into custody at his penthouse apartment, still wearing pajamas and demanding to speak with his lawyer. Senator Patricia Hayes was arrested at her Washington office, where she was found attempting to destroy documents related to her financial relationship with Morrison Industries. Deputy Attorney General Patricia Stone was arrested at the Justice Department, sending shockwaves through the federal government. Vincent Caruso proved more difficult to locate. His private security firm had apparently been disbanded overnight, and his employees had scattered to avoid prosecution. But federal marshals eventually tracked him to a private airport, where he was preparing to board a plane to a non-extradition country. His arrest prevented the elimination of additional witnesses and recovered evidence of other corporate assassination schemes that Caruso had conducted over the years. The media coverage of the arrests was extensive and devastating for Morrison Industries. Elena Rodriguez's newspaper published a comprehensive investigation that traced the fraud scheme back to its origins and identified dozens of government officials who had facilitated the company's criminal activities. The story was picked up by national news outlets and triggered congressional hearings that dominated the news cycle for months. Marcus Rodriguez testified before a federal grand jury, providing detailed evidence about the night he witnessed the evidence destruction operation. His testimony was clear, credible, and devastating for Morrison's defense team. The security footage he had preserved became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case, demonstrating beyond any doubt that Morrison's organization had engaged in systematic destruction of evidence. Elena Rodriguez won a Pulitzer Prize for her coverage of the Morrison Industries case, but more importantly, her reporting helped ensure that the full scope of the corruption was exposed and that all responsible parties were held accountable. The trial of Charles Morrison began 18 months after Marcus Rodriguez first witnessed the evidence destruction operation. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of fraud, bribery, witness intimidation, and conspiracy. Morrison's defense team attempted to argue that he was unaware of the criminal activities conducted by his subordinates, but David Chen's testimony and the security footage made those claims impossible to sustain. Marcus Rodriguez's testimony was the emotional climax of the trial. Speaking directly to the jury, he explained his decision to document what he had witnessed and to bring that evidence to federal authorities despite the personal risks involved. "I spent 8 years protecting other people's property and secrets," Marcus told the jury. "In West. But when I saw what was happening that night, I realized that some secrets are too dangerous to protect. The American people have a right to know when their tax dollars are being stolen." The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Charles Morrison was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution of over $600 million. Senator Hayes received a 20-year sentence. Deputy Attorney General Stone received 15 years, and David Chen received 8 years in exchange for his cooperation. Vincent Caruso was tried separately on charges related to his assassination operations for multiple corporate clients. The evidence revealed that he had been responsible for the deaths of at least 7 witnesses and whistleblowers over a 15-year period. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Morrison Industries was dissolved as part of the criminal proceedings, with its assets being liquidated to provide restitution to the government and compensation to victims of the fraud scheme. The company's government contracts were transferred to other firms that underwent extensive background investigations before being approved. The case led to significant reforms in how government contracts are monitored. New whistleblower protection laws were enacted to encourage employees to report fraud without fear of retaliation, and new oversight mechanisms were established to prevent the kind of systematic corruption that Morrison Industries had perpetrated. Marcus Rodriguez returned to his job as a security guard, but he was transferred to a different building and received a commendation from the FBI for his courage in exposing the fraud scheme. He used the reward money from the government's whistleblower program to ensure his mother received the best possible care in her nursing home, and to establish a scholarship fund for young people interested in pursuing careers in law enforcement. Elena Rodriguez continued her work as an investigative journalist, using the recognition from her Morrison Industries coverage to tackle other cases involving corporate corruption and government fraud. She became a nationally recognized expert on defense contractor oversight and testified before Congress on multiple occasions about the need for stronger accountability measures. The Rodriguez siblings had started the case as ordinary people doing their jobs, but their willingness to stand up for what was right had changed the course of history. Marcus's decision to trust his instincts and document what he witnessed, combined with Elena's decision to investigate and expose the truth, had brought down a criminal organization that had operated with impunity for years. Their story became a reminder that even the most powerful corporations and the most connected government officials are not above the law when ordinary citizens are willing to take action. Their bopses. The guard had taken action, Charles Morrison had approved a full-footage lockdown, and in the end, truth and justice had prevailed over wealth and corruption. Both Marcus and Elena had to live with the knowledge that they had made powerful enemies and that their safety would always be a concern. They had learned that doing the right thing sometimes requires extraordinary courage and that the price of justice can be higher than anyone anticipates. Years later, when asked about their decision to expose the Morrison Industries fraud, both siblings gave the same answer. They would do it again without hesitation. Some things they had learned are more important than personal safety or comfort. Some truths are too important to remain hidden, no matter how powerful the people who want to keep them secret. The case of Morrison Industries became a landmark in the fight against corporate corruption and government fraud. It demonstrated that with courage, determination, and the support of dedicated law enforcement professionals, ordinary citizens can hold even the most powerful institutions accountable for their actions. Marcus Rodriguez, a security guard who simply did his job with integrity and attention to detail, had changed the world. His sister Elena, a journalist who refused to ignore a story that could have cost her life, had ensured that the truth was told. Together, they had proven that in America, justice is still possible when people are willing to fight for it.